Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Taylor's of EV, live on YouTube. There's been a lot of technical issues, both from my home internet and from YouTube going on in the past 24 hours. So I apologize in advance if you don't get notified for this or the stream cuts out. It's just like YouTube's breaking, my internet's breaking. Hopefully we have a stable stream, but we'll see. I don't mind smaller streams anyway. They're more personal and I can keep up with the chat, which I prefer anyway. So the main news I wanted to kick off today's live stream with, in case you're new, the streams don't have to talk about what's in the title and the thumbnail for the entire duration. I just usually tend to pick a topic to kick it off with. And the one I wanted to start with was Idra basically posting about a second GigaPress, a 9,000 ton one. So this is not a small one. Basically, the first one was already finished and we're pretty dang confident, like with fairly high certainty, based on Elon's comments, that this GigaPress is going to Giga Texas. Dare I say confirmed. I'm hesitant to always use that word, but it's essentially confirmed that the first 9,000 ton GigaPress was sent to Giga Texas, and that is going to be used for the Cybertruck underbody. That was the wording Elon used. He didn't say rear underbody, which is what they say for the castings of the Model Y. So maybe it's just a giant underbody piece for the Cybertruck, but they finished the second one. And on LinkedIn, they've said that it's going to be heading to Asia now. So that's been kind of an interesting development for me, because now there's all of these speculations going on what exactly is a 9,000 ton GigaPress being sent to Asia for. The first instinct that a lot of people had was, oh, well, maybe 9,000 ton GigaPress for the Cybertruck went to Texas. Maybe they're planning on Cybertruck production in Shanghai. But the more you think about it, it's like, I mean, they'd have completely different specs for the Cybertruck. They're probably a different design in a lot of ways with different dimensions. And I don't think that the Cybertruck production is going to be prioritized that quickly, at least for the Chinese market. Although it should be mentioned that pickup truck sales are growing there, but I still don't think it's quite as large as it is in the United States. So that led more people to question, like, well, perhaps kind of like what iKing RPG is suggesting, like, are they working on a single piece, a single casting for a Model Y that combines the front and rear castings, or the Model 3, which is a bit smaller, so maybe that could be more doable with a 9,000 ton GigaPress, or it could be a completely new model that Tesla hasn't unveiled yet. For years there's been talk about Tesla trying to compete more heavily in China, which basically was the big topic of my last video I posted about how the made in China Teslas are getting super duper cheap. The Model Y starts at $38,000 there. The Model 3 starts at like $34,000 there. Just super affordable compared to the US and compared to Europe. So as that competition starts to pick up between BYD and NIO and Tesla and Xpeng, or Pang, sorry, I always get the pronunciation wrong. So perhaps there is a smaller, more cost competitive compact vehicle that personally I don't think is necessary in order to achieve super low pricing. But I guess the reason I say that is because I view low 30,000 as basically as cheap as Tesla's models will go, at least in North America and Europe. I have a very hard time envisioning, even if you got it to single piece castings and LFP and super duper efficient design, and it's all carpet, like fabric seats, and you have to provide your own display. They don't give you a display. I don't know. They can't do that legally. But even if you got all of the parts and components down, I think that the cost of labor is probably going to prevent Tesla from selling a sub $30,000 model in North America and Europe, because we tend to have higher cost of labor. Maybe Mexico could make it work, but I still haven't announced Giga Mexico, which has me wondering what the plan is with that. If that's actually meant for massive vehicle production, or if that's just meant for parts or batteries. I don't know. But China, however, has much lower cost of labor. That's why all of our laptops and smartphones and basic half of the electronics, more than half of the electronics you're using, were probably made in China. And if not, a decent chunk of the components inside your electronics are probably from China, because they just have such a efficient supply chain and infrastructure put in place for mass producing silicon and chips and components and complex parts and complex electronics. They are just wired for that. They've just laid out their factories in such a way that it's very, very difficult to replicate in other countries. I know that there's a big push for more domestic production and more silicon to be built in the United States, but just the sheer number of like the circuit board material versus the transistor material, and like all of the mining that goes on in China that allows for their supply chain to move so quickly is part of the reason that it's so cost competitive to just design something in America, ask them to build it in China, and then ship it back. That honestly is still, even with all that shipping cost, is still more cost effective. But I guess because what I was getting at is the EV market is so competitive there, with BYD securing a very large margin of full battery EV sales. Maybe Tesla does want to introduce the more compact model that would start equivalent sub $30,000. And if they could find a way to build that with a single piece casting for the front and rear, and just have, I think I saw Jordan from The Limiting Factor talking about this on Twitter as well. I love the speculation going on. It's really cool to talk about what could be in the works. But he was discussing how if you just had a single piece casting for the front and rear and just a slot basically in the bottom that the structural battery pack could fit in, so that brings more rigidity to the casting. You could reduce the number of robots and reduce the complexity that's required in assembling Tesla's vehicles. I wonder how much it actually saves to not have two separate castings. You know, I could see the argument being made of like, okay, you're going from two parts to one part. Is that really that big a deal? But it makes me wonder of like, well, if you need a whole separate Giga casting to do the front versus a whole separate casting to do the back, then reducing the factory footprint of those two castings and instead just having one giant one, maybe that saves a lot of money. Thank you for the support, Mersey. Tesla Compact would sell so well in Europe and China. Well, I'm sure a Tesla Compact would sell well anywhere. I honestly, like, no matter how bad it is, it could be missing a frunk. It wouldn't have a powered hatch. It could have fabric seats. It could be having a tiny display. They don't ship it with a 15-inch display. It could not have heated seats or CarPlay or ventilated seats. It could have pretty much the crappiest specs you could imagine. It could have 150-mile range, but any Tesla, anything that's branded as a Tesla with a starting price like sub 30K, yeah, I'm not convinced there is enough manufacturing capacity in the world. Like, there's no supply chains in place that are ready to take on that amount of demand. It sounds like, from what we're hearing, that there already was just a huge jump in sales from the most recent round of price cuts that Tesla made in China, particularly for the Model Y, because crossovers tend to sell at higher volume than sedans. And the fact that the Model Y is now starting at $38,000. Yeah, they said they got something like 10,000 orders within a day or something. Low-key envious that China will get a new model exclusively for a while first before the US. Well, we're all speculating here. I don't pretend to know exactly what's going on. Another hypothetical that we should probably not rule out, that some people have been toying around with, is that the next 9,000-ton GigaPress that's headed to Asia, it might not be for Tesla. It could be for BYD. It could be for GM. It could be for any number of automakers there. I haven't seen anyone really with much concrete evidence that this company or this brand is planning on switching to Giga castings. But if so, that's still a great piece of news for the EV market as a whole, to find out that there may be non-Tesla EV makers that are looking for, simplifying costs, simplifying production. Because even if it is BYD or NIO or whoever found a way to design a vehicle for super cheap, and they're going to use this new 9,000-ton GigaPress to build it, that means that they're going to have probably a huge cost advantage compared to Tesla. So Tesla is going to have to one-up them too. This is the beauty of competition. It's not necessarily confirmed that it's for Tesla. I would say it's fairly likely, though, just because of the timing to me. Like, I've seen people saying, well, it might not be for Tesla. Personally, I think it is, just because they already built a 9,000-ton GigaPress, and they've already shipped it to Giga Texas. And Joe Tegmeyer, follow him on Twitter. And on YouTube, if you don't like Twitter, because Elon. He's taken lots of pictures of Giga Texas, and there's lots of pictures of the Hydra GigaPress showing up. Not the biggest pieces have arrived yet, but a lot of the little parts are already showing up. And that was only just like a couple months ago that they finished the 9,000 ton GigaPress. And just a couple months go by, and they already have another 9,000 ton GigaPress. The idea that you could design such a complex, giant piece of machinery and switch it over from Cybertruck parts to instantly switch it over to another company's components, that I find a little bit hard to believe. I'm not going to say it's impossible, but it's hard to wrap my brain around the idea that they would go from like Cybertruck Tesla components to, okay, now we're going to build for BYD or someone really quick. Like, the back-to-back part of it makes it hard to grasp that they wouldn't have the same client requesting. I'm sure Tesla, seeing the insane cost advantages of switching to single-piece castings, it would most likely be Tesla that is the one buying all of the readily available GigaPresses within the first few months. I actually wouldn't even be that surprised if Tesla had like signed a exclusive contract with Hydra that said the first couple 9,000 ton GigaPresses you can build, we want first dibs on those, because Tesla's been shipping these single piece casting things, I think, in China and in the US for several years now. So I personally have a hard time believing that this is not for Tesla, but I'm not a supply chain industry expert. You know, I could be wrong, but I personally think that it is for Giga Shanghai. Especially because we know that Giga Shanghai is expanding right now, and they are planning on opening up, not at a separate facility, but just a whole different section of the factory to increase their run rate to well over 1.5 million vehicles a year, which is insanely cool. But if they're already starting to, it appears, match production with demand, so even with these price cuts, you know, the Model 3 and Model Y are seeing delivery estimates slip, but not by a lot. It's still, even with the super low $34,000 Model 3, it's still looking like a 1 to 4 week wait time in China for that model. So it's like, if Tesla wants to grow Giga Shanghai to 1.5 million a year, it's either going to have to export a crap ton more vehicles, or they're going to have to get even lower than that, which is exciting to talk about. I love the idea of electric vehicles reaching cost parity with gas vehicles. And now we're getting to the point, like, if you look up the average price of a new car, not electric, just any new car, they're currently sitting at around $45,000. So in a lot of ways, Tesla, I don't know what it is in China, but in a lot of ways, Tesla is already starting to undercut new gas vehicle prices. Once you start getting battery-only electric vehicles down to the price of new gas cars, and they start to become the cheapest vehicles, not just to operate, but also to buy up front, that's when I think the EV transition, we start reaching that exponential moment of the S-curve. Unfortunately, yes, because China has so much lower cost of labor and such a localized supply chain at Giga Shanghai, they are probably going to get, if they are, again, I'm speculating a lot here, if they are going to make the Generation 3 platform, which they'll talk about in Investor Day, it's most likely that China and Europe would get that first before we would get it, just because you can export things from China for real cheap, and China has the lowest cost of production of pretty much all these gigafactories. So that's what makes me think, yeah, if they are going to do a super cheap Tesla, it's probably going to be in China first, because ironically, they already have super cheap Teslas in China. And just like how I love the Model Y rear-wheel drive with lithium iron phosphate, which is only $38,000 in China, that model is also now available in Europe, because it is so cheap to build it in China that it's actually not that crazy to ship it all the way to Europe and sell them there. So similarly, I would imagine that they would start with this hypothetical Model 2 or the compact Tesla, the first vehicle on the Gen 3 platform. They would start with that in China, and then slowly, as they ramp it there and match demand there, they could bring it to Europe, and then we would probably have to wait in the US, likely until Giga Mexico is online ready to produce them. But there's a lot of speculation going on with that. Thank you so much for the super chat, Matt. He didn't say anything, but he just super chatted. That's very kind of you. Sorry, I've been kind of rambling here. I'm not addressing much of the chat. Mike in the Woods says, last time I was this early for something, I was putting down a
Yes.
Cybertruck reservation. There you go. There's the super chat. Thank you, Matt. He said, my bet for the China-bound 9,000 GigaPress is single body castings for Model 3 or Y. That's also not as crazy as a theory. Honestly, Mike in the Woods probably is more accurate in assuming that if they're just updating the Model 3 or Model Y with castings, which the Model 3 is still not using any in any factory, Shanghai or Fremont. There's no single-piece castings on the Model 3, or, the big kind at least. So it's a little confusing to me that they would go straight to 9,000 tons. To me, it would have made more sense if you were going to switch to single-piece castings to use, the Model 3 is smaller than the Model Y a bit, so it would make a lot of sense in my head to just use the same 6,000-ton gigapresses that they've been using at Texas and Fremont for the Model Y, considering the Model Y is, a top seller. But maybe Tesla is seeing plenty of demand and plenty of a profit margin on the Model Y in China. So perhaps Mike is right in the thought process is maybe if we can figure out a way to do the Model 3 with a single-piece casting front and rear, maybe even tweak the design a little bit. Like maybe the made in China Model 3 is a little bit shorter. Maybe it doesn't have as much frunk space or something. They just, rather than introduce a whole new compact model, which again, I personally don't think that the subcompact is really saving that much money, because ultimately the way I view it is the most expensive part of the EV is the battery pack, the electronics, the self-driving computer and all that, and the powertrain. And already you're getting basically as cheap as Tesla is willing to go with any vehicle with the Model 3, because it's rear-wheel drive, LFP. So all you really need in order to drop the price substantially of the Model 3, in my view, is single-piece castings and structural battery pack. Those are the two biggest breakthroughs that would save the most amount of money. Just making a Model 3 that's smaller, I don't see how that, the amount of steel or aluminum that goes into the chassis just by it taking up less space, you're still going to have a decent sized battery pack. You're still going to have a powertrain. You're still going to have a computer and display and everything, I assume, because that's what Tesla... I'm sorry. There's just this cat. There's cats running around my house all the time. And there's this cat that was just walking by and he looks inside the car. He just looks inside the car and gives me this menacing glare. He can probably hear me talking or something. And he just walks in front of the car and he looks at me like... and I was trying not to bust out laughing, but he had the most upset eyes on his face. But yeah, I guess the one thing that I could see unlocking... Sorry, that cat just threw me off so bad. Is that if you're able to combine the front and rear castings into one, and suddenly just with one gigacast, you can build almost the entire underbody, that maybe helps reduce parts and complexity a lot more. I don't think it's just the sheer amount of material that goes in. It would just be the factory floor space doesn't take up as much room if you have to have two separate castings and weld those together instead if you just have one big casting. Yeah, that would make the most amount of sense to me. Going from 2 to 1 is cutting the casting process in half. Right, but I mean, it's true, but it's also a bigger gigacasting. So it's not like you're reducing the floor space or the cost of that gigapress from 2 to 1, because instead of 2 6,000-ton gigapresses, now you have one 9,000-ton gigapress, which is larger and probably more expensive. So I'm not saying there's no cost advantage. I'm just saying it's not... I wouldn't expect it to be linear. Okay, we went from 2 castings to 1 casting. That means we saved 50%. It's no, you probably are saving more like 25 ballpark. But that's still a lot. 25% is a lot. So if you could find a way to build an EV and reduce the parts by that much, then maybe that's what Tesla's figured out. It could be BYD then. My hot take, the Model 2 Robotaxi model won't have any display. You'll need to use your own phone or tablet running their app. I think about that a lot. I've actually was debating that. In terms of interior components, looking around my car, there's a lot of plastic. There's a lot of, the fake leather, and there's the Alcantara. And I was like, what's the most expensive component in the interior? My guess is it's the screen. It's a pretty bright display, 15 inches. And Like, I'm debating, like, how much could they offload if they didn't have that display to worry about? I don't know. I mean, it's a 60 hertz display. It's not like 4K or anything. It's a little over 1080p. So maybe just they've got the price on those down far enough that it doesn't matter. But I think there are some legal issues with delivering a vehicle without a display. I think there needs to be some form of speedometer. So maybe hypothetically Tesla could build in just a tiny, not very good but legal like low quality display right behind the steering wheel that just gives you your speed and what gear is selected, that just covers the very, very basics, but leaving out things like, I don't know, the full self-driving visualization and the navigation, even just saying, well, if you want to do navigation, you got to use your phone. That, as crazy as that sounds, I know a ton of people that would be like, it would be insane to deliver a car in 2023 without navigation software. I'm like, Tesla would be the one to do that, though. They would be the kind to be like, yeah, you're on your phone anyway. They did the same thing with key fobs. They're like, yeah, we don't need to ship our cars with key fobs. Your phone is your key. We'll just give you a little credit card as a backup. Mercy says, yeah, we are reaching the interesting stage now in terms of competitiveness for Tesla. At least in China, absolutely. I would say that Tesla is having to really, really try hard to compete, which is fascinating to watch. I'm all for it. I'm all here for let the competition get good, get close to Tesla, start taking market share, start taking people away so that Tesla feels like they got to lower prices and make more compelling offers. In the US, no, I don't think there's much competition for Tesla at all because it's the supercharging network versus everybody else, and everybody else sucks. So, like, I don't see that situation changing that much. I hope that we get some price reductions in the U.S. this year, just because, not because the demand, not because the competition has caught up, but mostly because Tesla has caught up on their backlog. Once they catch up on the backlog, then we could see some price cuts, but it's probably not going to be as drastic as China's. I don't. It would be great, but I don't think we're going to get what China got, which was like 13%, 15%, 17% price reductions. Couple that with the tax credit, it probably isn't that much incentive for Tesla to lower prices by that much. What I think of countries like the Philippines, Thailand, India, etc. gets EVs. When do I think we'll get them? I've got family in the Philippines that I'm hoping to see later this year. I'm guessing once Giga Shanghai is able to produce vehicles at an insanely low rate to where they basically reach the bottom, which I feel like we're getting close to. What I mean by the bottom is the hypothetical cheapest you can possibly make a reasonable EV. We could get into golf cart territory, but I don't think that's what you mean. What I mean, like, is hypothetically, if we're right and this 9,000 ton GigaPress is for Tesla and it's for the hypothetical Model 2, the more affordable model, even if it's not for them, it could be for BYD, but in which case BYD with this 9,000 ton GigaPress in their arsenal means that they're going to be able to undercut Tesla even more, and Tesla's going to have to try to undercut them. So whoever the GigaPress is for, I think there's positive attributes for all EV makers from it. Once they're building, 1.5 million to 2 million vehicles a year, and a lot of those are likely going to be, sub $30,000 Teslas. Or I guess you're not asking when they're going to get Teslas. You're asking when they're going to get EVs. So for your question, Tor, it doesn't even matter if it's a Tesla or not. Once we start getting sub $30,000 EVs with decent range, which in my view is over 200 miles or so, with decent fast charging capability, they'll probably start looking more at exporting. That's what Giga Shanghai was doing a lot of 2022. Is like, okay, we caught up on our current backlog. Now we can start delivering vehicles to other markets that we weren't available at previously. So because the cost of production is so low there, they can afford to spend that extra money on shipping the vehicles, delivering them, and paying the import fees or whatever in whatever country they wanted to deliver. And the truth is that from what I know about the Philippines and Thailand and India is just that the market for vehicles there, people don't buy very high-priced vehicles. Like, even if Tesla was able to sell today a $25,000 vehicle, the market for $25,000 vehicles in India is not very strong because most people there are used to spending, like $10,000 on vehicles. And actually, I think two-wheeled vehicles sell better than four-wheeled vehicles there. So it's almost like such a drastically different market that I understand why Tesla's not prioritizing it massively, because if they just tried to bring in the Model 3 to India right now, it would probably be, with the import tariffs that India has, it would probably be over $30,000, in which case, not a huge market for it. So, that's what I think we're waiting on, is like, once you start hitting the bottom of like, what can we hypothetically, how cheap can we possibly get an EV, which in my view is probably going to be 20,000, maybe a little bit less. Once we get real readily available lithium iron phosphate cells with decent energy density, structural battery packs, single piece castings and all that, single motor, super efficient, really crappy interior, like the worst interior you could possibly imagine, just like crappy cloth fabrics, and nothing feels premium, everything feels plasticky and cheap. I think you could probably get it sub $20,000, and they catch up on the demand for those vehicles in the first world countries. That's when they'll start looking for exporting to countries that are tending to not drop as much money on those types of vehicles. That's my guess. Let's see. It is harder to accurately assess demand with Giga Austin / Berlin ramping faster and production is in line with order flow. The long wait times in China are related to the line upgrades during the year. Well, the thing is, Tim, there's not as much long wait times in China anymore, so I think that there is something to them. I'm sure they're upgrading the assembly line, but I think that has more to do with them looking at ways to cost cut and produce at higher volume so that they can afford to price them lower. I don't think that... but I agree that, especially with Giga Austin in Berlin, they are every couple of months producing way more vehicles. Like, it's insane how fast they've grown. I think people overlook that a lot. A lot of the time, people just have this, like, blanket statement towards Tesla of, well, they've built the Model Y before, so it's easy for them to ramp production. But I'm like, no, but I mean, think about it for a minute. Like, Giga Berlin and Giga Austin came online after the Rivian and Lucid factories, right? And I know that there's a certain amount of advantages to using smaller battery packs than Lucid or Rivian, but I still applaud them for that. It's like, hey, if you have an efficient design that can utilize a smaller battery pack, that's to your gain. But the fact that they came online after and were able to surpass them in output within months is like insane. And I know why they're able to do that. It's because of the way the Model Y was designed, but that's where I give them immense credit, is like, not only did they design the Model Y to be very simple and easy to scale up, but they've optimized their factories to go from, okay, like Giga Berlin hasn't even been online for a year yet. It's been 10 months. And now they're building over 3,000 vehicles a week, which translates to over 12,000 vehicles a month. I don't even think Lucid's delivered 12,000 vehicles yet. Like, they've maybe come close, but like, it's just absurdly fast that they've been able to build out these factories and then just start cranking them out like that. And when they're ramping that quickly, it's going to affect the wait time of vehicles, because more and more people on the East Coast and the central U.S. are going to get Model Ys from Texas, not Fremont anymore. So yeah, when your output capacity is doing that, you're right. It's very difficult to figure out what is the demand doing right now. Are people actually canceling orders? Are people waiting for the tax credit? Are people mad at Elon? It's probably a combination of all those things, but I have a hard time believing anyone that says they know exactly why. It's like, or that there's one reason. I don't think there's one reason. Ivan says, any plans for Berlin to build rear-wheel drive LFP Model Y? I thought so. Wasn't there a report not long ago about Tesla using Blade battery packs at Giga Berlin? I don't think they've started yet, but I heard that there was at least talk of them doing that. So yeah, I believe eventually that will be a thing. Maybe later this year even, because they can use the existing Model Y parts and assembly lines and just don't put 2170 cells or 4680 cells in there. Just put LFP battery in there. But I'm not sure how close Giga Berlin would be to building their own LFP packs, so they would probably have to rely on imported packs. Tim says, I believe this GigaPress is for the compact China model single cast. I believe they would work out the kinks for Cybertruck in Austin first before China production. Yeah, I think so too. I also just don't think that the Cybertruck is going to be prioritized. Like, I know that pickup truck sales are pretty good in Asia, but they're not as crazy lucrative as they are in the US. So my guess is that if Giga Shanghai was prioritizing like, okay, we're the biggest Tesla producer, we're making the most amount of vehicles, BYD is catching up to us, and we're catching up on demand here. What do we need to do? It would make a lot more sense for them to say, okay, let's work on the compact, smaller vehicle that we can sell for even cheaper, that will compete with BYD and Xpeng. And Cybertruck, I don't think that's a whole separate market, and I don't think they're worried about that right now in China. Like Cybertruck is all going to be focused on the U.S. market primarily. I guess if you were to build international Cybertrucks, it would make sense to build them in China because it would be the cheapest to build them there, and then you can ship them to Australia and Europe and what have you. But I don't think that's what Giga Shanghai's focus is on right now. Um, do you think they will build the Tesla Semi in Shanghai or Berlin? Semi needs to be sized down a bit for them. I do think eventually they'll get there, but probably not in the near term. I think the ramp, based on how little we're seeing of the Tesla Semi, and we're not getting delivery numbers. I was very disappointed by that, to be honest. I really wanted to know how many Tesla Semis had been delivered. The fact that they didn't disclose that at all, and, there's a couple people that are spotting Tesla Semis around the Modesto area, but not much. And there's pretty much just like one or two mega chargers in existence. I get the feeling that, Tesla Semi production has started, but it's just incredibly low volume, and it's not going to be anything to actually report. It could be in the like under 100 units a month type thing. I know Elon claimed that they want to be at like 50,000 a year by 2024. I think that was just Elon sticking to a previous timeline that they originally laid out. And just like how Elon expected Cybertruck production to be done by the end of 2021, and he thought it would start at 40K, I'm pretty sure that was just Elon saying, well, that's what we said we're going to do, so we're going to shoot for that until I see evidence that we can't do it. And he's just kind of not looking at the evidence very closely. Don't tell me that we can't do that yet. They're just kind of expecting 4680 cells to ramp to a certain amount. So, yeah, I do think in the long run they will probably start building semis in Shanghai or Berlin, but it's such a small piece of their sales that it's not going to be prioritized for quite some time. Anthony Teamster says it's for the Model 2 single casting. I hope you're right. I think that would be the most exciting result. Model S and X full steering wheels borrowed from the Highland Model 3 that is coming without stocks? Sven says no, Model S and X steering wheel is bigger than the 3 and Y. I don't think just because it's bigger that means that they wouldn't put it. I'm not convinced that it's cheaper. I think that's what they're going to prioritize with the Highland refresh. If it's cheaper to keep the old wheel in stocks, then they'll keep the old wheel in stocks. If it's cheaper to switch to the Model S and X full steering wheel because that doesn't have stocks, then they'll switch to that. But I'm not sure which is cheaper, honestly. I could see the argument made for both. You could argue that, well, if you don't have these stocks, then you don't have to have these little moving points and these buttons on the side to press for your windshield wipers and your parking button. But I could also see the argument of, no, the Model S and X is, it's bigger and it has these capacitive buttons, so you got to bake in more touch controls to that design, and they probably are already building at China and Berlin and in the US hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Model 3s and Ys that all have the same steering wheel and gear stocks, which are probably like very cheap. They're made of plastic. They're not very complicated. It's just like a design that they've scaled up across all of their vehicles. Like Model Y sales are really high, Model 3 sales are really high, but you combine the two, they're both sharing that component. So by keeping it, it's probably pretty cheap. So my theory is that we're not going to get, no gear stocks on the Highland refresh. I'm still convinced that the Model 3 refresh in the US is mostly going to be about castings and maybe structural battery pack. I don't see especially watching Tesla like drop the ultrasonic sensors, which annoyed the crap out of a bunch of people. I don't see them putting much into the interior that makes the Model 3 much more desirable, like ventilated seats or a bigger display or a driver display or a yoke, or yoke honestly doesn't make it more desirable for a lot of people. But I think that they're gonna try to retain a lot of the same quality of life features that they have currently with the Model 3, but just improve the margins by switching to castings. Personally, that's what I think it is. But Tesla is developing a 12,000-ton GigaPress themselves to cast bar bodies in one piece, Tasmanian. I did a report on that. That was a patent. We haven't seen actually any company design that, and Tesla changes plans so quickly. So I wouldn't. Tesla has, all tech companies usually have a lot of patents on things that never turn into actual products. So I've seen the 12,000-ton GigaPress patent, but I'm not convinced that we need that in order to do a compact car or whatever. What if they keep the car price the same but make FSD cheaper? They could, but I don't think that's ultimately going to change the demand all that much because FSD take rate is very low. I think it's like 10% or less right now. So the only number of people that would be interested in buying a Tesla for FSD is like under 90, under 10%, not super high take rate. Let's see. That could be why they released this Model 2 Robotaxi to Chinese market first with no built-in display. Could also be what 9,000-ton GigaPress is for. Investor Day is coming up. Yeah, it'd be really cool to get some more insight on this on the Generation 3 platform at Investor Day. I would be personally, I am far more interested in Tesla's manufacturing approaches on lowering prices because what I love about Tesla, someone was asking that earlier. Dovanis, thank you for asking. Like, what do I love about them? Like, I love the hardware, like, primarily. Like, yes, the software is cool, but I love the designs. I love the way the car looks. I love the way they drive. I love the supercharging network. And, like, I feel like EVs in themselves are cool. Just, like, a vehicle that doesn't need gas, that has a battery pack, and how do you get that battery pack to last a long time? How do you get an electric vehicle that's connected with your phone? Like, there's... What I mean by the hardware is just, like, products that they sell. I like the product as a whole. I'm not as invested in their software as a service approach. I guess I'm not as excited about full self-driving because I've seen them push back timelines so many times, and I've seen so many people get really pumped for full self-driving, and then they get it, and they're massively disappointed by how bad beta performs. But then you ask some people, and they say, beta's great. Oh, I'd never intervene. And then other people say, oh my God, I have to intervene a million times a day. And you just get this back and forth of, like, different experiences because we all drive in different places. So I'm like, that's not, like, a for sure thing. But what I can tell you is a for sure thing is, like, these cars are fun. Like, I love the fart mode. I love just being able to drive on a road trip, have it stay between the lines, plug in and it charges. And when you get home, you plug in and charge, and you just have a decent vehicle with lots of storage space that's comfortable to sit in. The seats are so nice. That's why I love working in here, and why I was pretty bummed that a lot of people voted on my previous poll, like, do you guys prefer me to film in the car or film in my office? Most people were voting for the office. I prefer working in here. Like, I enjoy sitting in these seats. I love that they're heated. I love the heated steering wheel. Like, I love the aspect of Tesla that's about, like, we built a product, we will deliver that product. And that's what gets me excited about Tesla manufacturing, like the GigaPress or a smaller design or the Cybertruck is, like, developing hardware in products that fit people's lifestyle better. And I guess I don't see as much excitement about the Robotaxi with that because it's like, okay, that's just about, like, getting me from point A to point B. It's just like transporting a person in a cheap way. And, okay, they didn't crash. That's, I mean, cool. That's cool. But, I mean, like, how are they going to fit their car seats in that vehicle? Or how are they going to, like, tow in that vehicle? How are they going to move things in that vehicle? Or are they going to have to put up with what the last rider left behind, if you barf in the vehicle or you, I don't know, hotbox in the vehicle or what have you? I think people like having vehicles that belong to them, that they don't have to share because they can treat them the way they want. They can customize them the way they want. This is why we have paint colors, is because people like to buy the vehicle that kind of suits their personality and know that that's theirs and it will be ready for them and they don't have to have hundreds of strangers in it every day. That's what I'm excited for. I was never on board with my dream was never for my car to go drive people around and make me money. My dream was just, I would like to own a car that I can sit in and put in a destination and it drives me there. But it's my car. I'm comfortable with the idea of I have to buy it. I wasn't as comfortable with the idea of, oh, you don't own a car anymore and now you just have robotaxis everywhere that drive you where you need to go. It's like, yeah, but, like, I've done public transportation. I've taken the bus, and I know how people treat things that they don't own, and I'm not as pumped for that future if that ever happens. Um, let's see. Earlier, waiting for Tesla motorcycle. Elon said no motorcycle, but they've also done things that Elon said they wouldn't do. So, I mean, Elon is not this end all be all with Tesla. So, at some point, Elon's going to move on. I think there was even a meeting where he said he hopes to leave Tesla by 2030. I think at some point he's going to realize that Tesla's set up for success and they don't need him anymore, and he'll probably move to working more purely at Twitter or SpaceX or Neuralink. Of all the companies Elon's working at, I think Tesla is the one that he has set up for the most success with the teams present. Drew Baglino is amazing, and I think he should run the company. Zach Kirkhorn seems very wise. I feel like of all the companies that Elon works at right now, he would be fine leaving Tesla, and I don't think much would change, personally. I mean, the things that would likely change is how much development gets put towards robotaxi and bot, which I don't think is going to pay off, but other people do. So I guess for that argument, people would say, oh no, Elon needs to stay at Tesla. But I'm like, yeah, that hasn't really gone anywhere. Highland specs are a mystery. That's true, Grace. Tesla Semi won't scale until they make them outside of Giga Nevada. I'm pretty sure the plan is to still to eventually start high volume production in Texas. I believe that is the plan still, yes, but I know that there is so many other things going on at Texas that are going to take priority over the Semi. Like, for one, as someone who watches the drone videos and knows about the layout of, like, here's where the paint shop is, here's where the Cybertruck assembly will be, here's where Model Y body in white is, I don't know where they're going to build the Semi if they do move it to Giga Texas. That factory is going to be tapped out with Model Y and Cybertruck. They're going to have to build a whole new section. I mean, the property is much bigger than just the facility, but my point is, right now they're working on new buildings surrounding Giga Texas that are primarily about cathode production. They're going to have to build out, like, level the land, put in the steel, like, start from scratch, basically, if they do want to build Tesla Semi at Giga Texas in the future. I don't know what they expect Giga Nevada's, like, peak run rate to be. But again, it's a semi truck, so you don't need a crazy amount of them. It makes a lot of sense to build the Tesla Semi nearby where the cells are built, because the Semi needs a crap ton of cells. So Giga Nevada builds all of Tesla's 2170 cells pretty much, at least for North America. And I'm pretty sure that's what the Tesla Semi is currently using. So it makes sense to build them there because they have a ton of 2170 cells. But if they can ever get 4680s to a high enough energy density that it makes sense to use 4680s in the Semi, then I guess you would want to build them close to where a bunch of 4680s are, which Giga Texas probably will have a bunch, but yeah. Sorry, I can't. You guys are asking so many great questions. I'm looking at the chat, I'm glancing at everything, and I'm like, oh god, that's a good point. That's a good point. Cybertruck, the next iteration. Nice. He says, they have definitely been avoiding an Osborne effect with this Gen 3 platform. If they start production this year, I'm pooping everybody's pants. Yeah, they're in the process of starting to ship the 9,000 ton GigaPress to Asia. If it is for that Gen 3 platform, we're probably not, like, it takes time. For one, Giga Texas being a great example, it takes a while to move all these giant parts. Like, I remember reading back in October, I think, or at least November, it was like, the GigaPress, the 9,000 ton GigaPress has arrived at the port of Austin, and we're still waiting for, like, most of the giant parts of the GigaPress to show up at Giga Texas, which is honestly making me nervous, because I'm like, I know that it's not like as soon as that press is assembled, production can begin. That is like one part of many stages, and the fact that they haven't even gotten that done yet makes me feel like that delays, like, how soon Cybertruck can be ready. So knowing how long it's taken to get the 9,000 ton press to Texas makes me think it's going to take just as long, if not longer, because it's going further to go from Italy to Asia. Actually, do you go across the Pacific, or do you... I don't know what makes more sense. Probably makes sense to go across the Pacific versus going the other way. The other way around the planet might make more sense, but I don't know if you don't have as many boats that way. You'd have to go around Africa. Yeah, I don't know. It's a long distance to travel. I don't think, even if this is for the Gen 3 platform, I don't think they would start production of it this year. It would probably be a next year type vehicle, maybe early 2024. Um, let's see. Aren't lower priced models being allowed to lower fleet price averages to raise demand while keeping margins? Yeah. Was someone stating otherwise? Being allowed to lower fleet price averages? Yeah. I mean, that's what I talked about in my last video, is like, if you're wondering why Teslas aren't cheaper, it's because they don't have the capacity to sell them for less. Like, you could sell them for less, but the margins would be less and the wait time would be longer. So the key is production capacity. Once you unlock higher production capacity, you can take smaller margins on each vehicle, which means you can lower prices and still make the same amount of money. That's the key. So that's what I've been pushing on my channel for years now, is just like, that's why I'm so interested in all the manufacturing stuff. And that's why I'm such a big fan of lithium iron phosphate, is like, I'm fascinated by any technology manufacturing wise that can enable companies to build more of something so that they can collect a smaller margin on each one. So if you can make factories that are capable of building 1 million to 2 million vehicles a year, you can probably sell those for a lot less than what they're charging now, because all these factories are tapped out at, a couple 100,000 to 500,000. But we're seeing Giga Shanghai improve that, and it's getting better over time. You and your sensible skepticism. That would be a good alternate name for my channel, huh? Let's see. There have been sightings of Tesla semi-trucks being towed by diesel trucks. Do you think they're being transported, or do you think they are running out of battery due to limited infrastructure? That's a great question. I was very concerned by that. I did see those pictures that they were towing like a Pepsi official Tesla semi. I really don't know. There's a few good case scenarios I could imagine, and definitely some bad ones. The obvious bad one is that, yeah, there's not enough mega chargers, and they expected the Tesla Semi to have better range than they thought, and they were driving it around and it died, and now they had to tow it back to the factory. That would be a huge concern if true. The good case scenario is maybe they're still kind of testing it around, and Pepsi just wanted to see how far they could get on one charge. So they intentionally drove it till dead, just to see, like, let's just train. Or that could be another part of it, is like they're training new truck drivers that have never driven Tesla semis before. And they're very different, so maybe they're just experimenting with, well, if it does run out of range, let's practice so that we know how to save it, or how to tow it, or how to service it in an emergency. There's an optimistic view of it, or a pessimistic view of it, but honestly, I'm leaning more towards the pessimistic, which sucks because I'm a big fan of the Tesla Semi, but I do find it a little bit discouraging how little they're talking about the payload capacity, and they didn't want to disclose the size of the battery pack. They didn't want to disclose the tractor weight. And based on the comments made by Pepsi, it was sounding like, they can make pretty decent delivery runs with the Frito-Lay packages, because Frito-Lay is just moving around big bags of air that have a couple chips in it, right? Whereas the Pepsi semis are moving liquid, which liquid's very heavy. So if you're transporting lots of Pepsi beverages, then that's going to eat into your total payload capacity. And I've seen people speculating based on, what Tesla has shown in the back of, here's how many, what do you call it? Barricade parking barriers are on the back. So this is how much the Tesla Semi weighs, but they could be using this kind of payload. So roughly what I'm estimating is that the Tesla Semi does weigh a fair bit more than a traditional diesel semi, but there is probably some truth to the payload being worse. But my argument from the beginning has always been that not all semi trucks are running at max payload capacity. They're oftentimes limited by volumetrically the amount of space they have, and I thought that Tesla was a decent example of that. They are often from factories moving around tons of vehicles, and because Tesla vehicles are kind of oddly shaped, you can't perfectly stack them together. Sometimes those semi trucks, I've been by the Fremont factory many times, they're moving around 6 to 7 vehicles at a time, occasionally 8 or 9 if it's a huge load, but there's a lot of semi trucks I see Tesla operating, moving around their vehicles that have 5 or 6 Teslas on the back. And do the math on how much that weighs. Tesla Semi could probably get the job done, and has in the past when they were doing end of quarter delivery pushes. They were just driving around Tesla semis that were delivering Teslas on the back, which I think is awesome and cool. So it's like there are use cases. It's not like the first generation of the Tesla Semi needs to instantly replace every single semi-truck use case, but there is a lot of semi-truck use cases where it is useful, so that's why it makes sense to build it now, even though, sure, there's some use cases where it's not ready yet. What is happening with Pepsi? Let's see. I read that one. Both my son and I had beta withdrawn at the latest over-the-air update due to sub-80 safety scores. Anyone else? Interesting. You're at sub-80 safety scores. No, I haven't heard about that, honestly. Let's see. At Cyber Rodeo, Elon said 2023 would be a wave of new products and that they'd announce new ones. Yeah, Elon says a lot, you know. I remember what Elon said at Autonomy Day in 2019. Should I remind you of that? No, I think Elon is always overly optimistic, which you kind of have to be. I can't really even fault him for it. I mean, I do think there's negative consequences of him being overly optimistic, and if I was working at Tesla, I would really try to discourage him from doing so. But the truth is, Elon has accomplished a lot of amazing things in his lifetime, and he probably wouldn't have accomplished those amazing things if he was a pessimistic guy like I was. Like, if I were in Elon's shoes and I was always cautiously pessimistic about everything, don't get my hopes up, I wouldn't think that reusable rocket boosters were possible or that scaling up EV production profitably was possible. I would have just said, oh no, that's way too complicated. I would have looked at the status quo and said, no, it's not possible, or the risk is too high, you know. But Elon is the crazy guy that's like, no, there's a way to do it. And part of that comes from trying to oversimplify things in your head. You know, part of it just comes from, oh no, it's definitely possible. I can find a way to ramp up EV production profitably. I can find a way to make rocket boosters reusable. And everyone around you must be telling you, no, it's way more complicated than you think. And that's what I am right now. I'm the guy saying, no, that's way more complicated than Elon thinks. But the truth is, I think Elon's very good at finding out what's possible, but that does not mean that everything he puts his mind to will be possible. I think there's still a chance of, yeah, he can achieve these great things because he was right. You know, he saw a path to success and he unlocked it. But he may see a path to success in other regions where it's not possible, and he is oversimplifying to the point of, no, maybe it can't be done. And that's happened before, like with the alien dreadnought factory approach that Tesla wanted to have with the Model 3. They wanted the Model 3 to be essentially a completely autonomous assembly line that didn't have any people, and Elon admitted, actually, that's really complicated, and that was getting too expensive, and it wasn't ramping successfully, so we're going to have to rely more on people. And he admitted that in interviews, like, humans are underrated. And I'm like, how do we know that you're not going to have that same realization down the road with robotaxis? Right now, you're convinced that, yeah, with the right software and the right hardware and the right cameras and everything, you can solve full self-driving. You used to think you could make an autonomous assembly line, and then you realized how difficult that was, and you reached a local maximum and decided to switch towards humans. Could that happen again with human drivers? We don't know. I mean, I'm not going to act like I know, but I'm not going to act like Elon knows either, because he's been wrong time and time again. So yeah, I do think that, I don't know about wave of new products. I don't think if Tesla had a new, like, compact design, they would unveil it at Investor Day. They would just have an event to unveil it, just like they had an event for the Model Y and the Cybertruck. But Generation 3 platform discussion at Investor Day could be a lot about, here's the manufacturing tricks we're going to use on future vehicles. But who mentioned it earlier about the Osborne effect and pooping their pants or what have you? Like, there's definitely some truth to, you probably don't want to announce a compact model that's going to be $25,000 if you're not going to build it for a year, because that's going to kill current day sales. So it's probably smart of Tesla to keep it intentionally vague until production has begun. Asian Hydra could be for VinFast, otherwise Tesla Shanghai designed and developed Gen 3 Matchbox car. It's true. Even if it's for VinFast, though, I think it's good news, because it means that other companies are borrowing Tesla's manufacturing approaches and trying to undercut Tesla, which I'm all in favor of. Good competition. Yeah, engineering explained estimated the weight of the semi to be worse than a diesel truck, but considering the much lower cost to drive that he calculated, it should still be worth it. Yeah, I watched his video about it. He explains it pretty well. It's like, which I think is very reasonable. Like expecting the first generation Tesla semi to instantly replace all diesel semi trucks was unrealistic and just not practical. Um, First of all, especially with how battery energy density works, there are certain use cases that open up. Uh, there are certain semi truck designs that make sense for long haul trucking versus different semi truck designs that make sense for more local driving, more local deliveries and stuff. Like if the vehicle is not going 500 miles round trip, then it's probably better for the efficiency, better for the payload for the battery pack to be closer to a 300-mile range rather than a 500-mile. Because if you're not going the full 500 miles, then you're hauling around a bunch of extra batteries that aren't being used for anything. So depending on the use case, um, you're going to design the vehicle differently. And to me, it's kind of like expecting the first generation Tesla Roadster to replace all cars on the road. It was like, no, that's the proof of concept. It's the first generation. Same thing with the Cybertruck or the F-150 Lightning. If the first generation Rivian came out and you're complaining that it can't replace your, F-350 flatbed variant, it's like, well, dude, it's their first truck. Like, they had to start somewhere. And that's how I feel about the Tesla Semi. With energy density and batteries always improving as time goes by, the payload capacity will get better. I'm sure it's not amazing with the first generation, but it's enough to be useful, because it costs less to operate. So, yeah, I appreciate Engineering Explained doing that breakdown. Um, Sorry, Burkhart asked earlier. Thoughts on the standard range all-wheel drive Model Y being added back to existing inventory? Not good value by any means, but it shows what the 4680s are being used for. Yeah, that does point to that idea, because in the previous earnings call, they mentioned that they are still building 4680 Model Ys from Texas, when we were all kind of like, well, where are they? Like, where are those 4680s going? Because they're not in the configurator. For a long time, they weren't in existing inventory, so my guess was, okay, either they were giving us dated information and just saying, well, at one point we were building 4680s, but now we're not, because we were seeing a big stockpile of 4680 battery packs at Giga Texas. And everyone that went to the annual shareholder meeting said that they had changed all the assembly lines to 2170 Model Ys, and they weren't building 4680 Model Ys anymore from what they could see inside the factory. So I was convinced that they had stopped for a while. Maybe now, my best speculation on why they may have stopped is that because Burkhardt is correct. That's another good point. More recently, the all-wheel drive Model Y standard range has been showing up in existing inventory again, and I think the kilowatts has said there's over 40 now, which is definitely more than I'd ever seen. Technically, while not a great value, still the cheapest Model Y you can get, new in the U.S. Still a lot of money for them though. It's like over 60 grand for a 269 mile range, and it's not LFP. Is like, yeah, I mean, okay, cheaper, but not what we had in mind. Still doesn't qualify for the tax credit. But my guess is that, the single piece castings and the structural battery pack, that was all working fine. The assembly line was fine. It was the cells. Like, the 4680 cell ramp was taking longer than they anticipated, and they were trying to get Giga Texas to build their own cells, and they had said, I believe in previous earnings calls, that Giga Texas was using a second generation 4680 assembly approach. Not second generation cell, second generation assembly. So it's the same energy density. It's not any different from the 4680 cells that they originally shipped earlier in 2022. But they found a way to build them for cheaper. And maybe now they've come closer to cracking that code. And at Giga Texas, they've been like, okay, you guys are going to get me on a tangent here by that one question. The fact that they have now reintroduced it to existing inventory, and there appears to be a lot more of them. I remember back in like summer of 2022, there was like one or two you could find in existing inventory, but for the most part, it was just available for accelerated delivery. But there was never like 40 plus like there are now. Maybe that's just because demand has changed, but I don't know. if it is true that they've figured out a way to build 4680s more profitably, but it's the same energy density as before, then I would argue this is not good news for the Cybertruck. I would, dare I say, worried about the Cybertruck, because if that's what the energy density of the cells are, which, they weighed the 4680 Model Y, it's not much lighter than the long range, and the range is worse, and the cells have more cobalt in them. This means that the 4680 cells that would be going in the Cybertruck are not very energy dense, which would not be a good indication of what the Cybertruck range is going to be. It would not be 500. Hopefully it would be over 300, but again, my estimate is that the Cybertruck is going to be the most energy efficient pickup truck ever, but that it's still going to be the worst efficiency for any Tesla vehicle, not counting the semi. Semi is its own thing. I still think that if it's quad motor and it has rear wheel steering and it's as big as the Cybertruck is and it's using an exoskeleton and it's all made of steel and 6 seats, that big bed, it's still going to be worse than a Plaid Model X in terms of energy consumption. Most electric pickup trucks right now, like the Rivian and the F-150 Lightning, are consuming around 70 miles per gallon equivalent. I think the Cybertruck will be like 80 or 85, but the Plaid Model S miles per gallon equivalent, Plaid Model X, the big model, the big Tesla model with 3 motors and big tires. That's the other thing that eats into your efficiency, is the tires. But the Cybertruck has a larger frontal surface area, so I feel like there's no way that could be more efficient than a Plaid. And again, these 4680 cells aren't proving to be much lighter, so I don't think the Cybertruck would be lighter than the Model X either. I think it might be like 80, 85 miles per gallon equivalent, which means using 2 basically Model Y standard range battery packs, because those are 4680. So basically you just stack 2 of those together and you would have about a 120, 125 kilowatt hour battery pack, which accommodating for an 80 to 85 miles per gallon equivalent with the Cybertruck on a 125 kilowatt hour pack, it would roughly translate to a little over 300 miles, which I think that's reasonable, because Rivians and Fords are selling at very high price and very high volume. And I think the Cybertruck still, with low range, meaning a little over 300 miles, would be the best electric truck you could buy, because it has supercharging access, and all the other trucks are relying on EA, which suck. So I still don't have that much confidence that the Cybertruck will have super high range, but I would love to be proven wrong. Mike says, I remember the Semi and Roadster unveiling claims. Being a bit conservative on your estimates isn't good for marketing, but good for setting expectations and exceeding them. That's true. I just don't think Tesla needs to push marketing much anymore. I don't think it's marketing purposes that Elon's being overly optimistic on timelines. It's probably for investment purposes. The Tesla bot almost feels like the perfect way. It should be there about. Okay, I got to wrap up here. I think the Tesla bot was the perfect way to convince the Super Bowls that Tesla is the only stock you should buy. Because if you truly believe everything Tesla says and you trust in their timelines even remotely, then yeah, I can, again, if I just believed everything they said, I could easily see the argument that, well, Tesla bot will take over most manual labor jobs, and Tesla will have an advantage over everybody else in terms of machine learning and their custom computers and dojo training. So that means Tesla will easily become a 20, 30, if you start doing the math on how bots would replace manual labor and how much money Tesla could charge for them and how much money it costs to build the Tesla bot, that would be easily Tesla could become a 40, 50 trillion dollar company, because basically they would be able to take over the manual labor market. So you can easily do that kind of napkin math and just be like, see, replace this many jobs. How many manual labor jobs are there? Boom. Tesla makes this much money, this much profit per bot, $50 trillion company. So I don't believe everything they say. And I do think there will be billions of edge cases that end up proving more complicated, and it won't scale nearly as well as they're hoping. Similar to how full self-driving has taken so long for them to roll out. And it took way long. And the robo-taxis were supposed to be here 3 years ago, according to Elon. So that's why I'm skeptical and I don't believe their claims. But I think that Elon's optimistic claims encourage their loyal followers to not put their money anywhere else. Like, if you believe what Tesla says they say they're going to do is going to happen, then yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be that crazy to say I'm going to take out equity from my house and dump it all. I'm going to take out loans just so I can buy Tesla stock. And then, of course, this year, those people ended up panicking because they realized, like, all of that money they put into Tesla stock cut more than in half. And they're like, wait a minute, I thought it was to the moon. So that's why I'm more about, because I'm a content creator, not I'm not trying to convince you to buy a stock or anything. I'm trying to keep expectations more realistic best I can with my videos. Do I think Project Highland will be standard with dual motor and LIF so they get better margins because motors aren't that expensive to begin with? Ooh. Ezra brings up a good point. I think I did a video on that a while back, but yeah, like, similar to how Giga Texas is doing a standard range Model Y with 2 motors, I guess it wouldn't be that crazy to do a dual motor standard range Model 3 because you could justify charging more for it, but still boast, well, it's all-wheel drive and it's faster. So when you really compare the value, they're going for better value, not lower price. The only thing I could see against that is, I don't know what LIF is exactly, but the only argument I would make against that is I think that the lithium iron phosphate battery packs are bigger because they're not very energy dense. So the battery pack may take up more space, and that might make it more difficult to do dual motor. I've just noticed that whenever Tesla uses LFP, it's not dual motor. Like in China, they have Model 3, Model Y, both using lithium iron phosphate, but they're both rear-wheel drive. They could do a dual motor LFP. Well, I mean, can they? Maybe they can't. That's, I guess, what I'm asking. They do a standard range all-wheel drive in Texas, but that's not LFP. That's 4680. So those cells, while they're not as energy dense as 2170, I still think they're more energy dense than LFP. So that would be the only thing, I think, preventing them from doing a dual motor. And maybe when you're pricing a vehicle that low, the cost of the powertrain accounts for a larger portion of the vehicle. So personally, I'm not a big fan of dual motor everything. I love my rear-wheel drive Model 3. It still amazes me how fast this car is, despite being the slowest Tesla. And there's a lot of markets that don't really need all-wheel drive. I know there are some markets that need it and appreciate it, but there's very large markets that don't. Let's see. Tesla's the new Apple. Yeah, let's see. I just want a price reveal for the Cybertruck at this point. You know, King of Florida, I would love that as well, but my theory is that it's not going to be good, and it's probably not even going to be known for a while. I bet, like, my prediction is similar to how the Tesla Semi and the 4680 Model Y back in 2022, they started deliveries without telling us what they cost. Both a commercial vehicle and a... Sorry, my car's going to sleep. Both a commercial vehicle and a consumer vehicle, they started deliveries without telling us what they cost. And I thought that's what we were going to get at Cyber Rodeo. It's like, first deliveries start now, and they just start delivering these 4680 Model Ys. They didn't tell us what the range is, and they didn't tell us what the price was. A lot of us were convinced that the EPA filings for this new standard range all-wheel drive, that was the 4680 Model Y. So a lot of us were like, well, the range is 269 miles. Maybe they'll address that on stage, but they didn't. And they could do something very similar, I think, with the Cybertruck, because I bet you... I'd be willing to bet top dollar that there's a crap ton of Tesla employees with Cybertruck reservations. I know of at least one, the guy that worked at the Tesla service center that I went to several times. He was waiting on his Cybertruck. And I think they could easily, just like they have with the 4680 Model Y, for the most part keeping it employee only occasionally dropping it in existing inventory. They could easily keep the Cybertruck internal and say, deliveries have begun, when they've only delivered it to employees. Now, even if they keep it to employees, they would still have to file with the EPA an official document that would disclose the range, so we would at least get some efficiency numbers and some max range numbers, but the EPA doesn't have to disclose price. So Tesla could keep the price of the Cybertruck hidden even after deliveries begin. I'm trying to remind you guys of that, because I think a lot of people are convinced that we have to get that spec before the deliveries begin, and it's like, not really. They can tell their employees to sign NDAs and say, okay, you're going to pay this much, and they'll do it, but they don't have to disclose it. At least the few employees that took delivery of 4680 Model Ys at Cyber Rodeo, they didn't come forward and tell us the price. They didn't say anything. Yeah, now the 4680 Model Y is available as an inventory vehicle because it's been out for almost a year now. It's been in production for a while, and it seems like they've finally caught up with 4680 production. But my point was, for the first several months, for quite a while, you couldn't buy a 4680 Model Y as a consumer. If I remember correctly, it was like 3 or 4 months. So I'm just trying to warn you guys of that, because I think that there's probably less employees interested, Tesla employees. There's probably less of them interested in buying the 4680 Model Y because, frankly, it's not a very good value. It's right now, I think, if you find one, if you're lucky enough to find one that doesn't have any add-ons or options, it's $62,000 with like 50 miles less range. It's like 60 miles, I think. 269, yeah, 30, yeah, it's like 60 miles less range than the long range for a $4,000 difference, which is like, okay, for when you're dropping 62 grand on a car, an extra 4 grand isn't all that much. Most people are buying the long range. However, tons of Tesla employees would buy the Cybertruck. I think Tesla could sell every Cybertruck to an employee they make for probably the first 4, maybe 6 months of production, just because Cybertruck production I expect to go pretty slowly. Compared to the Model Y, which requires fewer cells per vehicle, and it's reusing a lot of parts and assembly processes that they've already done in other factories. So ramping Model Y is a piece of cake. I don't think ramping Cybertrucks is going to be as easy. So my guess is that Cybertrucks will be delivered and driving around, and we still won't know how much they cost. Maybe it'll leak. I think it did leak at some point. Some source said I paid 60 grand for mine, and then people are like, well, that's the employee price. That's not the actual consumer price. And I'm over the Cybertruck, more into the efficiency and battery technology. Yeah, whatever makes EVs more affordable, I guess. That's what I'm excited for. Let's see. Here in Norway, the Tesla Model Y took the record of the best-selling car ever sold in Norway last year from the VW Beetle. Yeah, I know. I saw that. That's incredible. Let's see. I think. I read that. Sorry. Cybertruck should have vehicle to home. Such a waste having such a large battery chilling in the garage when the power goes out. Yeah, I mean, Tesla has said the NACS connector is capable of doing that. I don't think it's as useful as people think it is. First of all, you have to buy an inverter for your house to be able to do that. And if you have an inverter, you're more likely to have energy storage at your house anyway. Like the number of times, the thing is, if you rely on your car battery for your house energy consumption, that means you're going to start the day with less range than what you ended it with. So you're going to have to charge that car somewhere. So I guess the only use case where it becomes useful is grid outages, which I'm not saying is never, but I think that it's probably always going to be more cost and more practical to just have local energy storage at your house. Basically have a power wall or have Megapack back up the entire grid. I'm actually very impressed. I've been going through a lot of wind and rainstorms lately where I live, and we haven't lost power, which I'm surprised that a tree hasn't knocked anything over yet. But yeah, it would be kind of handy, but I understand why it's not super prioritized in most vehicles, because if you're having a massive energy outage and you're willing to drain your car in the process to make sure that your fridge keeps running and your TV stays on, well, if the grid outage drains your battery pack to the car, then now you can't go anywhere, in which case you can't get food, you can't get water, whatever. You know, it's like, it depends on how massive. We're not talking about a multi-week level grid outage. We're talking about, I guess, a few hours. So I guess it would be nice for your car to power your house for those few hours, but I don't know. It's like, if it'd be better for the grid to just be more stable as a whole, which Megapack allows for and Powerwall allows for. So That's why it's like, yeah, it's nice to have, but not as big a deal as I think people make it out to be. Tesla was supposed to open superchargers to all cars in 2021. Guess that's not happening. They said they would start opening up the supercharger network. I don't think they ever said they would open every supercharger. They have opened up superchargers in Europe to non-Teslas, and they have filed documents for V4 superchargers that would have CCS and NACS. I don't think they've started deploying them yet, but yeah, I think people misunderstand the term superchargers opening up to everybody. They just assume that means, oh, okay, so I can take any EV to any supercharger. And it's like, it's not that simple. The cables aren't long enough. Some of them are way too busy to accommodate for more EVs. And like in Europe, they only open a few superchargers to non-Teslas, but it's mostly all the chargers that are less busy and don't have that much traffic. Most people with a truck own a second car. Yeah, but what is that car powered by? If you're draining all of the house energy, if you're having a grid outages, the best solution is going to be a Powerwall and Megapack. I think more, not so much grabbing electricity out of your. It'd be like saying, everybody who owns a gas car should have a gas generator so that they can siphon the gas out of their gas car and put it into the generator. Like, I mean, you could. It's not a terrible idea, but it's not the norm. I don't think most people look at it that way. 4680 Model Y. Sorry, I read that. Lithium iodine iron? I don't know anything about that one. Aptera vehicle to grid home would be interesting. Would be nice trickle charge during the day. Oh, yeah, charge the home from the car. I think the Aptera is just super efficient that 700 watts of solar would probably not give you very much to your house anyway. But I've talked to a lot of people about getting solar on their house, and it tends to complicate a lot. You have to start pricing out, like, okay, it's not completely free, and now there's laws trying to get passed about charging people money for having solar because they need to maintain the grid in some way. And then you have to replace the roof, and you have to get quotes if you ever sell the house on how much it costs to remove the panels, replace the roof, and put the panels back on. And you have to be a certified, trained professional to do those things. I've talked to a lot of people, and I like solar as a technology. I'm just not sure putting it on my roof is the best way to go about it. I would rather kind of just put it on my vehicle like an Aptera. And if it's not an Aptera, then maybe if they get the price of the solar roof down, where the panels and the shingles are the same thing, it might make more sense. But even those, solar cells get weaker and don't produce as much energy over time. So when the price of electricity and the price of the solar system is at the amounts it's at right now, it's like, okay, your break-even point is 20 years, but after 25 years, you got to replace them. So I don't know. Do you think the 9,000-pound GigaPress is designed for the next generation small vehicle and not Cybertruck? That's my guess. I think I'm agreeing with Jordan. Is Generation 3 platform, super cheap Tesla, sub $30,000 is probably what this is for. But I could be wrong. It might not even be for Tesla. But I appreciate you guys for tuning in and all of your amazing questions. I could do this all day if I'm not careful, but I got to get going here. I've got more videos on the way. So stay tuned for those. And thank you all for watching. Have an excellent